perhaps you really care about your characters, and it can upset you when you kind of think, oh, I think it's time to have a war in the story, and you feel sad for your characters about what they're going to experience. And of course, I also had the natural feelings of, perhaps, Sarah, perhaps this has gone too far and you're a bit too attached to this imaginary world, and, perhaps you should stop. This is now going into crazy realm because you're having nightmares about, a character, a fictional character, being alone and scared. So some of you are going to think I'm crazy for what I'm going to talk about today, whereas others of you are perhaps going to feel understood for the first time, because I don't think many people are prepared to talk about this online. So today I'm going to talk about my experiences with how world building has sometimes impacted me negatively in terms of my emotional state. So world building making me anxious or making me cry and making me upset. And by sharing my experiences with you, I'm also going to share with you how I've learned to manage those emotions. So if it is something that bothers you, you might be inspired by the story that I will share today. So for those of you unfamiliar with my story, I've been building my Paracosm, which is a personal imaginary world. I've been building my Paracosm since I was 9 years old. I know that Paracosms are slightly different to world building because there's already from the get-go a sort of more of an emotional attachment. But I do believe that some people who do world building are very dedicated to and attached to the world that they create. And also perhaps those who suffer from maladaptive daydreaming might also be able to relate to my stories that I'm going to tell today. So let me tell you about the first time that I experienced anxiety in relation to the world that I was building. I started my world Chitasia when I was 9 years old, when I bought my stuffed toy hedgehog Chutney, and I naturally created the world that Chutney comes from, which is called Chitasia. And I've been continuing that ever since, and that's what I do on my channel now. But the anxiety to do with Chutney started when I was 16 years old. I was taking the train a lot more frequently than I used to, and I was taking Chutney with me, and I started to feel really anxious about losing Chutney. Now, I know that some of you will have completely imaginary or fictional fantasy worlds and will not have a kind of object or toy that you're afraid of losing. But I think that this can relate to, in general, attachment to characters and stories that you create. So I started to become anxious about losing Chutney because I was taking her on the train and I was like, what if I left my bag? And then Chutney would be lost and Chutney's world would be lost, Chitasia would be lost, Chutney would be lost, and what the hell am I going to do? And it made me really, really worried. Of course, there's a normal practical aspect of this that, lots of people care about sentimental objects. And, if you have something that's special to you, of course, you don't want to lose it and you might want to be careful. But how I think this relates on a bit of a deeper level because of the Paracosm and the world building is that, yes, I was upset and worried about this idea of losing this special object, but it went a bit further because this is also the character of Chutney. Or she's not really a character, she's more like a personality of Chutney. And I started to get worried, but if she got lost, she would be scared and she would be alone. And what if she was crying and she needed help and she's stuck somewhere horrible and she's hurting? Or, I started to become concerned for her well-being. Now, as a 16-year-old, suddenly becoming frightened about losing your stuffed toy, I did start to think, I'm aware that this is not normal. Most 16-year-olds are not attached to their toys. But I started having nightmares about it. I started having recurrent nightmares about losing Chutney. And it was something that was really detracting from my life for a short amount of time, to the point that I was having nightmares. The specific one that I always think about is that I was walking around like a city centre and Chutney was rolling away in front of me. And as I tried to catch up with her, she would roll faster and faster and I could never catch up. And it was sort of, was something that was really impacting me emotionally. And of course, I also had the natural feelings of, perhaps, Sarah, perhaps this has gone too far and you're a bit too attached to this imaginary world and, perhaps you should stop. You should stop your world building. You should distance yourself from Chutney. This is now going into crazy realm because you're having nightmares about, a character, a fictional character, being alone and scared. And I think you should stop because borderline crazy, right? But it wasn't sustainable. And it wasn't sustainable because I love Chutney. I love the character of Chutney. I love the personality of Chutney, and I love Chutasia and doing the world. And so I like to think, if you have a relationship, if you think about a relationship that you have with someone, it could be a partner, it could be a mum, a dad, or friend. Most of the time, your relationship with them perhaps is perfectly fine. And then you have one argument. You don't end the relationship over one argument. It's not entirely bad just because of this one incident. And so I thought that to myself, I get a lot of joy from Chutney and Chutasia, and it's actually at the center of a lot of the jokes that I have with my family and with my partner. Oh, she's so cute. And I just didn't want to stop. I am fully functioning as a human, and I can function in this world. I contribute to society, and I can look after myself. So if I like to play with stuffed animals and make up imaginary worlds, so be it. That's what I'm doing. But what to do about this worrying about losing Chutney and having these nightmares? Well, what I ended up coming up with is I'm not going to stop doing the world building. So instead, I need to, I suppose, ironically, do more world building. And the solution of getting around it was to add a new part to the story of Chutney. So Chutney's story is that she is a hedgehog from Chutasia who has traveled through time and space to inhabit a toy body on the planet Earth. And so what I did was I sort of added something that felt natural to that story. If Chutney could come all the way through time travel and different dimensions and end up inhabiting this body, why couldn't she inhabit another body? And this is where my sort of theme of solutions starts to come in. If she could inhabit this object, then if this object got lost, she could inhabit a new object. Obviously do not want to lose this toy, but it added in this kind of safety net that if this body was lost, the character of Chutney, the world of Chutasia, would not be lost and could inhabit a new object. And actually to sort of convince myself, maybe convince is not the right word, but to really absorb that into my psyche, I would sometimes pick up random objects and make them kind of act and talk like Chutney. Chutney does have a voice. And this helped me kind of really get used to this idea that, yeah, she's in this body, but she could be in this hairbrush. Hello, Chutney, And so that stopped my nightmares. And that worked pretty well for about 10 years. I did not have really much anxiety around my world. And as the kind of science of my world grew and we learned more a bit about the special realm, that the time travel realm, which is called the time soup. So the Chutney as a Chutasian hedgehog entered the time soup and then came out on Earth. And I've made a video about that if you're interested. I'll link it below. So for the second part of the story, which I suppose is the first solution, but truly amplified, I want to just take a small tangent. It does loop back around though, so I do advise listening to my tangent. I know some people do like to skip ahead. I want to share a story about an exercise that I did in the therapy session. And the exercise in the therapy session was centered around imagination. And basically, so I didn't have a very good time at school. I hated school and I used to feel quite helpless and alone, and I used to cry a lot before I used to go to school when I was a child. And I'm thinking I will make another video about my experiences with school because it may well have contributed to why I started my Paracosm. And I know that that is a question that I've been asked, which is what are the circumstances in which one creates an imaginary world? So I won't go into too much depth now, but basically I didn't have a fun time at school, and I was talking about this with my therapist, and she had me do an exercise where I imagined that I was once again 9 years old and that I was in the school classroom and I'm feeling alone and I feel like no one cares about me. I'm just some anonymous student and no one cares about me. And she had me imagine what would you like this situation to look like, or what could help this situation be a bit better than it was. And I did this exercise where I imagined a teaching assistant walking into the classroom, sitting next to me, and kind of checking in on me and asking questions. Are you okay? Is the work all right? Do you want to go outside? Shall I call your mum? And the point of that exercise, I mean, there's lots of things that come from doing this kind of imagination exercise, but it kind of helps you get a new perspective on like what needs were not being met in that scenario. These kind of questions that the classroom assistant was asking, like, are you okay? Do you want to leave? Are kind of things that there may be questions that I should ask myself more often, even as an adult, checking in with myself, am I doing okay? Do I need to eat some food because I'm focusing too much on my work? Am I people pleasing? This kind of thing. But what I want to get to is this exercise showed me the power of imagination. That through imagination, you're not rewriting the past, but you're kind of revisiting the past in fantasy, and kind of adding things to it and playing it around can help you see things in a different viewpoint, or see things in ways that you didn't before. And they can help you to manage difficult emotions that come from those memories. So going back to the world building and the power of imagination, I recently, I would say like in the last year, I felt pretty confident that I was really assured that if Chutney was lost, she couldn't be lost. She would find her way back to me. And I built into my world this idea that we were kind of like twin, is it twin flame? Is that what they call it? I don't know, but we were like two sides of the same spirit or essence or something. And therefore, we couldn't be separated. And when I think about it psychologically, and I've understood more about my attachment to Chatasia, my world, and to Chutney, I realized that for me, the Paracosm is so important because it's self-expression. So of course, if I think about not being able to do the imaginary world, of course it's distressing to me because it means I can't express myself. And that's a normal thing that you would be upset about not being able to work on your world. And what I've come to also understand is that Chutney, and the character and personality of Chutney, she's not me, but she's aspects of me and an expression of me. She's kind of me, and I kind of like to say, she is me and I am her. And of course, she exists in my mind. Yeah, you do. She exists in my mind, and she's part of me. And so, of course, if I imagine being separated from that, or not having access to that, or that permanently ending, of course it would cause me so much grief and anxiety because it's me. It's like someone saying part of you is dead, or you can never, use part of your personality again. Of course it would be distressing. So it makes complete sense that I would be so anxious and worried about being separated from the toy and the character and the world of Chutney. And maybe you can also relate to that. And maybe if in your world there are events that occur that are not so cheerful, so wars, famine, diseases, etc. Perhaps you really care about your characters, and it can upset you when you kind of think, oh, I think it's time to have a war in the story, and you feel sad for your characters about what they're going to experience. And I think that's, well, for me, judging on me, I think that's normal, but I'm not very normal myself. But I think it's understandable and reasonable that if you care about your creation, you would care about the suffering of your creation. And to put that more, relating it to the mainstream, when I think about, for example, the last season of Game of Thrones, so we won't get into what we think about the last season of Game of Thrones, but many of you will know that lots of people did not like the final season of Game of Thrones, and they also didn't like the ending of Game of Thrones. And people watched this show for years and years, and they became very invested in the plot lines and trying to figure things out. And lots of people were very disappointed and probably in pretty bad moods when Game of Thrones didn't end in a way that they found satisfying. And, nobody really bats an eye of that. They, they think, oh, that's pretty normal. You're disappointed your series has ended. You don't like the ending. But these people have emotion about this because they're invested in someone else's world, the world of, what's it called? Westeros. They're invested in Westeros and they care about the characters of Westeros. And that's totally normal, right? But you making your own world and being invested in caring about the characters of your own world would not be normal. I think that it's even more plausible that you'd care even more because they're your creation. So that's just my 2 cents on that. If you're feeling kind of awkward about the fact you care about your creation, I think that's totally reasonable. So going to the big dilemma that I found recently was I'd solved the issue of Chutney finding herself lost. But what if I die? I was like, great. What if I die? What's gonna happen? Does Chutney stay on Earth? Does Chutney not stay on Earth? Are we separated permanently forever? And I don't know if I will feel emotional when I'm telling you about this, but yeah, I know I'm saying it in a bit of a distant way because I'm recalling to you and I'm making a YouTube video. But please believe me that I don't need to beg you to believe me, but I'm just telling you, this is something that really upset me. And I remember one morning in bed, like I don't know if I think it was a morning. It was probably early afternoon, knowing me. So one day in the early afternoon after waking up, I was crying. I was thinking, I'm going to be separated from her, like when I die. And, I think that when I die, Chutney will stay behind here on Earth because my partner, Max, he knows the character of Chutney. He lives with Chutney for 10 years. He's developing his telepathy with the personality of Chutney, and he's helped a lot with some of the inspiration for Chitasia. And, if I was to die, if both me and Chutney were to die together, that would be a terrible thing. It would be like 2 people dying, I think, for my family and for my partner. So I think that Chutney would stay. If I died, Chutney would stay, and she would look after the people here, and she would talk to them, and for sure she wouldn't leave them. She would hang around. So what I ended up doing was something like the first solution, having to add something to the story, or it's intuit something that feels right for the world, where you can add in some more information about, I can't be separated from her because she is me, right? So we can't be separated long term. We can't be permanently separated if I die. It's just crazy. But Chutney will stay on Earth. So what I decided was Chutney will stay on Earth for as long as people know who she is and are treating her nicely. And the moment that she doesn't want to be here anymore because there's no one left who remembers her, or she finds herself in a bad situation, she will go back into the time soup, which is the time travel realm, and she will go back to Chitasia. And so when I die, I will go into the time soup and I will wait there for Chutney. Time doesn't pass in the time soup, so I won't notice. So Chutney will be here and she'll stay with everybody and I'll be in the time soup. And of course, because we have our telepathy, Chutney will be able to relay messages from me to the people who are still on Earth. And then when the time comes, all the toys, because there's lots of toys that have come through the time soup, all the toys will be waiting in the time soup. And when we're all together in the time soup, we'll all go to Chitasia and start a new life all in Chitasia. So that's something to look forward to. Don't know yet exactly the logistics, the practicalities of this. Like, is this the scale that we will be in Chitasia? Because I'm going to be like a giant Chutney. Or will I be, the same height as her? I don't know. And there was also something we explored that maybe in Chitasia, I'm Chutney's stuffed animal. Well, I've been stuffed human, which is a bit weird. So I don't know this, what exactly the solution is. Perhaps I will have to wait until that happens. But I crafted this narrative to soothe this real problem. As I like to call it, fictional solutions for fictional problems. If your emotional issue lies in the fantasy, then the solution probably also lies in the fantasy. So So I created this kind of afterlife for us, I suppose, where we don't get separated, and yeah, we're together forever. So my tips for you is that you are not a victim to your creation. You are at the end of the day, I know there are different levels of how involved people feel in their world. A lot of people with paracosms feel that they are just reporters on the world, that they're not even really making it up. Whereas, of course, people who are more consciously world building, they realize that they are like the god of their world. But however works for you, see if there is a way to uncover additional details that relieve your anxiety. That would be my trick. And that's what I'm intending to do if other things pop up that make me worried about the different characters or the worlds. I will do my best to remember that I'm in control of this, and I don't have to stop making my fantasy imaginary world because I'm getting too invested. And I think that for me, the story that I made about the afterlife, the kind of like traveling to Chitasia after I die, it exists in a kind of gray realm for me between like fantasy and reality. I do know, what is objective reality and things like that, but as I've kind of coined to myself, it's real in the story. That's what really happens in the story. It is true that in the story of Chitasia, Sarah goes there after she dies. It is real in the realm of my paracosm that I'm never separated from Chitney. How can I be separated? She's in my head. Anyway, you know, it exists in some sort of gray area, because as I'm saying, if the issue is fantasy, the solution is also fantasy. So it's kind of like a real solution. It's a real solution for a fictional problem. I don't know how to describe it, but I hope that you found that insightful. And as I said, on my channel, I'm making videos about Chitasia, about Chitney and Chitasia, and I'd love to have you stick around if you'd like to. Okay? Bye-bye from us.